The ramifications of a new relationship with the United States are immense. And one thing is clear, we cannot afford to wait this out. Canada needs to do more of that. Canada needs to diversify its trade. The more we can grow our markets, the more we can reduce the cost of business doing in the country.
Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in New York and declared that Canada must be masters in our own house. He wanted the world to see confidence, but what Canadians saw instead was exposure. Donald Trump has unleashed tariffs across steel, aluminum, autos, and farm products. The strategy from Washington is simple: squeeze Ottawa until it bends. Yet Carney's answer was not careful diplomacy. It was a political slogan, "Buy Canadian," that came across as an anti-American campaign. That posture may have rallied some crowds at home, but it alienated allies abroad. The United States ambassador openly expressed disappointment. The business community in Washington shrugged. In that silence, Canada was left standing alone. Behind the speeches, the numbers tell a darker story. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem warned bluntly that Canada cannot afford to wait this out. He pointed to the risk of long-term decline if action does not come quickly. But Carney's policies have made the situation worse. Instead of reducing costs, his counter-tariff strategy has fueled higher prices. Inflation remains stubborn. Exports to the United States have already dropped by 2% this year. For ordinary Canadians, the pain is obvious. Travel south of the border has collapsed, down 34% by car and 25% by air. Shelves in Quebec and Ontario are missing familiar American goods. Crown Royal bottling jobs have shifted south. Yet none of this has translated into new prosperity at home. Provinces that rely heavily on U.S. trade, Ontario's auto plants, Quebec's aluminum smelters, are absorbing the shock. In contrast, Saskatoon and Alberta, less exposed because of oil and agriculture, remain relatively stable. The divide across the country shows that Ottawa's grand strategy is failing to shield those who need protection most. For families, the reality is crushing. Groceries cost more, vacations are canceled, and household savings vanish on higher bills. Small businesses that once thrived on cross-border customers are watching sales dry up. Instead of a safety net, Carney's strategy has delivered new uncertainty, and the economic gap between regions is turning into a national fault line. Carney has tried to offset these losses with words. In his speech to the Council on Foreign Relations, he painted a picture of Canada as independent, unshaken by sudden changes in U.S. policy. But Washington read it differently. To the American ambassador, this was not resolve, it was provocation. He dismissed Carney's campaign as anti-American and warned that such rhetoric could poison negotiations. The flaw is obvious. Trump alone decides the trade agenda. Carney knows it, which is why he has resorted to appealing directly to U.S. business leaders in the hope they will pressure the White House. But companies in Detroit or Chicago are not eager to take sides against their own government. They want stability, not drama. Carney's message, therefore, lands with no real impact. Instead of building leverage, he has exposed Canada's weakness. The attempt to show strength has become another example of backfire. The costs are mounting, exports are falling, investment is frozen, and the deficit is widening. Carney has failed to protect jobs or contain prices, and the rift with Washington grows wider by the week. Meanwhile, Trump is gaining leverage. With the 2026 USMCA review approaching, he will enter negotiations holding the upper hand. Dairy, autos, metals, every sensitive sector is vulnerable to another round of demands. For Canadians, the warning is clear. What was meant to be a show of independence has turned into isolation. Ottawa picked a fight it cannot win. The backfire is real, and the worst may still be to come.
De minimis, it's a big deal. It's a big scam going.
And the Trump administration caught many off guard when it canceled an exemption and started collecting duties on shipments under $800 a little over a week ago. Now we are getting the first signs of how that's impacting Canadian businesses.
The shock came at the end of August when Washington pulled the trigger on a long-standing loophole. President Trump's administration ended the de minimis exemption, the rule that once allowed Canadian goods under $800 to slip into the American market duty-free. It was a bombshell move. More than 1.3 billion small parcels worth over $64 billion flowed south last year through this channel. That stream collapsed overnight. For Canada, the country most dependent on small cross-border trade, the decision landed like a hammer blow. A single policy stroke from Washington left thousands of Canadian businesses stranded, forced to choose between shutting off American sales or drowning in red tape. Trump framed it as a fight against illicit trade, but the fallout for Canada has been nothing short of catastrophic. The stories from the ground reveal how deep the damage runs. Small businesses across Canada report overnight losses, with some seeing as much as a quarter of their revenue disappear the moment American sales were cut off. Others describe losing nearly half their market as shipments south of the border became impossible. These are not isolated cases. A national survey shows 30% of small businesses already feel direct or indirect impacts, while another third live in uncertainty, unable to plan for the next quarter. That uncertainty is poison. Paperwork piles up, customs duties multiply, and what was once a thriving direct-to-consumer channel turns into a logistics nightmare. Across provinces, family-run shops and farm co-ops are quietly shutting off U.S. orders, conceding that the cost of compliance is greater than the value of the sale. In many towns, cross-border trade was not just a bonus, but the backbone of survival, keeping small factories open and seasonal workers employed. The sudden loss of that outlet leaves producers stuck with unsold goods and customers walking away. What should have been steady sales into the world's largest market is now a wall of barriers. The numbers speak louder than words. Postal shipments plunged more than 80% in just a matter of days. Fashion exporters, wool producers, furniture makers, even local food businesses are being priced out of the U.S. Almost every sector that relied on quick, low-value parcels has been dragged into crisis. Americans will see some delays and higher costs, but the real pain is north of the border. For Canada, this is not an inconvenience, it is an economic wound. Tens of thousands of small firms could lose billions of Canadian dollars in revenue over the next year. The knock-on effects will spread quickly. Layoffs in retail, shrinking farm incomes, and whole rural communities losing their main source of cross-border demand. What looks like a technical customs change on paper feels like an earthquake in daily Canadian life. Once again, Canada pays the price while Washington dictates the terms. And where is Ottawa? Prime Minister Mark Carney promised stability, yet his government is scrambling. He rolled back parts of Canada's own retaliatory tariffs, pledged a $1 billion relief fund, and pointed businesses toward temporary duty relief schemes. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business is begging him to share tariff revenues directly with struggling firms. But these are band-aids, not cures. They buy time without solving the problem. The hard truth is clear. One executive order from Washington was enough to paralyze Canada's small business sector and expose Ottawa's weakness. Carney's tools are reactive, limited, and slow. For families watching jobs and income slip away, that weakness is unforgivable. If this is the response to one trade measure, what happens when the next shock comes? Canadians are left to wonder how many more blows their economy can take before collapse.
We're starting to see the impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs as they begin to hit the Canadian economy. The unemployment rate in August ticked up to 7.1%. That's the highest level in 4 years. The Canadian economy shrank by 1.6% in the second quarter of the year. And during that same period, Canada's productivity dropped by 1%, the biggest plunge in 3 years.
The warning signs are impossible to ignore. Trump's tariffs are hammering Canada, and the damage is spilling into every corner of the economy. In August, unemployment jumped to 7.1%, the highest in 4 years. The economy shrank by 1.6% in the second quarter, while productivity suffered its steepest fall in 3 years. For ordinary Canadians, these are not abstract numbers. They mean lost jobs, vanishing savings, and mortgage payments slipping out of reach. Families look to Ottawa for leadership, but instead they see Mark Carney promising stability while delivering chaos. What was supposed to be a plan to shield Canada from American pressure is already collapsing under its own weight. At the heart of the crisis lies Carney's budget gamble. He has tried to sell Canadians on a vision of austerity and investment at the same time, as if the government can cut deeply while spending freely. The contradictions are glaring. Ottawa talks about trimming day-to-day operations, yet still fuels massive new projects that push the deficit toward $100 billion. The problem is not just the size of the shortfall, but the mixed message it sends. Businesses see a government chasing slogans rather than strategy, pledging discipline one moment and opening the taps the next. Private capital is retreating, down 10% in the second quarter, just as the economy needs it most. Even the prospect of lower interest rates from the Bank of Canada cannot restore confidence when fiscal policy looks so unstable. Credit agencies are already warning about Canada's debt trajectory, raising the risk of a downgrade that would make borrowing costlier for everyone. What was meant to project confidence now looks like weakness, and markets are responding accordingly. Now the human cost is mounting. More than 1.5 million Canadians are out of work. The employment insurance program, which should act as a safety net, covers barely a third of the unemployed, the lowest rate since 1941. That failure leaves workers completely exposed. Prime-age employees in once secure industries earning six-figure salaries are suddenly watching their homes slip away. In retail and hospitality, low-wage staff face eviction because 55% of minimum wage is not enough to survive. The pain is spreading far beyond those sectors. Auto plants in Ontario are scaling back shifts, steel mills are idling furnaces, and construction projects are stalling as material costs climb under Trump's tariff wall. Every lost paycheck means another family slipping into uncertainty, and every layoff adds pressure to already stretched food banks and rental markets. Carney's government promised resilience, but the cracks in the social fabric are widening. By failing to strengthen EI, by refusing to prepare for a recession, Ottawa has allowed this crisis to snowball. Instead of cushioning the blow, Carney's policies are amplifying it, turning what could have been a slowdown into a spiral of insecurity. Through it all, Canada's dependence on the United States has only grown clearer. The only lifeline left is CUSMA, keeping trade channels open and investment flowing. But even that is fragile, hanging on the goodwill of a president who has shown no hesitation to rewrite the rules. Trump can reopen the deal at any time, and Carney has no strategy to prevent it. Investors know it. That is why private capital is fleeing, leaving Canada with fewer options and less leverage. The reality is stark. Carney is not guiding Canada through the storm. He is being tossed around by it. Trump dictates the terms, and Ottawa scrambles after every move. Canadians pay the price, with higher unemployment, weaker growth, and a future clouded by doubt. And unless something changes, the worst may still be ahead.
Doubling production at the LNG Canada plant in Kitimat is one of the 5 major projects unveiled by Ottawa Thursday, getting fast-tracked approvals and potentially federal funding.
We know we can't control what other nations do. So we're focused on what we can control, building our strength right here at home.
Mark Carney stood in front of cameras and promised Canadians a new era. LNG, he said, would turn Canada into an energy superpower. Ottawa fast-tracked 5 so-called nation-building projects, and at the top of the list sat LNG Canada in Kitimat. The government bragged about doubling production, becoming the second-largest facility of its kind in the world, and diversifying Canada's markets beyond the United States. On paper, it looked like a bold plan to fight back against Trump's tariffs. In reality, it exposed cracks that Carney could not control. From day one, the announcement triggered backlash. Instead of uniting Canadians, LNG became a lightning rod for division, doubt, and distrust. The first blow came from within British Columbia. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs blasted the project, saying there had been no real consultation with First Nations before Ottawa pushed it forward. Carney had promised reconciliation, yet the most high-profile project under his watch ignored the very people living on the land. That hypocrisy is now front and center. Then there is the money. A project of more than $30 billion relies heavily on private capital. Ottawa is dangling modest incentives, but the reality is clear. Without massive outside funding, Kitimat cannot move forward at the speed Carney promised. Instead of projecting strength, the LNG flagship highlights Ottawa's dependence on corporate investors and weakens confidence that Canada can truly deliver, raising fears that taxpayers will ultimately be left covering ballooning costs and cleaning up the political fallout.
Out west, the Alberta premier looked for reassurance that pipelines would follow. All she got was a vague nod to a carbon capture project on a secondary list. For Alberta, it sounded like delay and betrayal. For British Columbia, it looked like Ottawa was trampling Indigenous rights. Carney's strategy was supposed to shield Canada from Trump's tariffs. Instead, it has fueled interprovincial tension. Alberta sees obstruction, BC sees disrespect, and the opposition in Ottawa sees incompetence. Even as American tariffs keep squeezing Canadian industries, Carney has managed to create a crisis at home. The promise of energy independence is already backfiring into political fragmentation, exposing a prime minister unable to keep his own country aligned while pretending to face down Washington. The more he insists on calling this leadership, the more Canadians see a government stumbling, failing to deliver clarity, and leaving provinces to fight among themselves.
Carney sold LNG as the silver bullet. He told Canadians it would open doors in Europe and Asia, blunt Trump's tariff wall, and deliver tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. What Canadians are seeing instead is delay, division, and disappointment. There are no tankers filled with new Canadian LNG heading to Europe. There are no pipelines breaking ground in Alberta. There are only headlines of Indigenous leaders furious at being excluded, provinces at odds with each other, and investors waiting on the sidelines. The tariffs keep hitting, the bills keep rising, and Ottawa's grand LNG gamble looks more like a stalemate than a strategy. The truth is simple. Carney overpromised and underdelivered. He wanted to look strong against Trump, but his LNG policy is backfiring badly. Far from becoming an energy superpower, Canada risks becoming stuck, unable to move fast enough at home, and still vulnerable abroad. For families watching costs climb, for workers waiting on jobs that never arrive, this is not a vision of strength. It is the reality of a government caught between rhetoric and results. And unless something changes, Canada's so-called LNG superpower plan may go down as one of the biggest failures of Carney's time in office.